Perfect. Wrapping up our conference now is Jane Frost, who is the CEO of the Market Research Society. And I had a really interesting chat with Jane, actually, ahead of today's conference. So I know she's got some fascinating stories from outside of the sector that she's able to share, which will really cement what other people today have sort of spoken about. So, Jane, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to those of you who've stayed on till the bitter end. I hope I can justify your commitment. I know you've had some great speakers today. Lisa O'Keefe is somebody I know well. I think I am sort of pushing her off the wagon, but we go out for Ladies What Lunch is, because she's got some great stories too. You may want to know why the MRS has been invited. I think that's the first thing I asked when they rang me up. We are the regulator, promoter and professional standards body for research, so I can't make any money out of this. We don't make any money out of you, but we will get the complaints if you get it wrong, and I will have to spend time with their lordships like I did on polling, explaining why you can't stop people answering questions online. There is a huge amount of growth in research, particularly in the sports sector. We gave one of our highest awards last year to the Football Association, and you will be pleased, I hope, to know that this is a sector in which, for once, the UK rules the waves, and we are literally the biggest per capita sector in the world, even bigger than the US. So hopefully we're doing something right. I just wanted to spend the few minutes that I have just talking to you about how what you've heard, what you learn from other people can be adapted almost any sector. I spent my life selling soap to the great unwashed, not very easy, selling oil back to the Arabs, selling the licence fee to the very ungrateful British public, and then I went into government, and now I'm trying to protect the research sector, because I do argue that my CBE wasn't for being clever, it was for other people's research. And I really want you to remember one thing, I suppose, and there's a huge amount of difference between listening and hearing. Hearing is purely the act of receiving an auditory input. Listening is decoding that noise into something with meaning or understanding. And I do hear a lot of the hearing and not a lot of the listening. And for those of you, and we're not going to have this debate, and I hope you didn't today, who remember that awful Brexit period, if you'd gone up to Yorkshire and not listened to the polls, as I did to see my parents, you'd have seen all those those Union Jacks and crosses of St George around the place, which never are, and you'd realise that Brexit was going to go through. It's not, I'm sorry, all about the data, although the data is incredibly important. So there are hundreds of different definitions of insight out there. What they are specifically not, and here are your tests, is HMRC used to spend, that's Revenue and Customs to thee and me, £150,000 a year. And the upshot is their answer was people don't like paying tax. That is not an insight, people. It doesn't work. Murdoch, a very well-known Murdoch paper, once supplied me with an application for a prize, and their insight was young men like watching football. God knows how much they paid for that. It must be based on the people you're interested in, and the people is a critical word in this, and it must truly resonate. If it doesn't resonate inside and outside your organisation, it won't be actionable. So I've picked three or four very, very short case studies. They're all about large organisations, but I've applied them in a number of different areas, and you wouldn't have thought you would be able to switch from one to the other, and also on some very small charities that I happen to be on the board of. So I know they work, but I can't spend all my time talking about them. So HMRC used to define their customer base, and I think sport still does to a certain extent, or certainly I feel it when I'm being talked to by sports bodies, that there are only two sets of people in the world, and that's the compliant and the non-compliant. That's i.e. the good people and the bad people. So they spent millions of pounds as a result of that, sticking people onto the naughty step and inventing more ways of closing loopholes. Totally useless way of going about things. I say it as an ex-senior manager of Revenue and Customs. But I think sport does that to me a lot too. It talks to me about sport when actually I need to be helped to do other things. And one of the things that we tried to do at Revenue and Customs was actually say this isn't about whether people are good or bad. It's about awareness. And funnily enough, there are a lot of people who still are not aware of the need to pay tax, and they are the most vulnerable. So older generation women coming into widowhood whose husbands paid their tax, they don't know about these things. And then there are two groups of people. There are very clearly the people who are motivated to be bad. They don't want to comply. In my view, I know it's not very politically correct, but the Revenue and Customs liked it. Throw away the key. You can find them, throw away the key. Don't waste money on them. But actually, most people want to do the right thing. What we did identify through this was there are about 12 million people out there who need help. And what are we doing? We're being really rotten to them. And what further research shows is that if you are off-putting to people in need of help, they will either default into never listening to you again, or they will need help time and time and time again. So it's not in your best interest to do that. So if you're going to send a letter saying, hey, or an email saying you should be doing X, please don't use heavy words straight off because people won't listen. And you will have wasted your money. So in this, using this sort of segmentation, you can really start to see how you can stop doing things and start saving money as well. So let's just take a very personal history. You could see me before you. I am slightly overweight. I have major spinal issues. I am not very fit. I used to play hockey. I used to be a rugby player. And I used to sail catamarans competitively. I'm now a Harris senior executive. I'm a mother, a dog owner, and I have a load of pro bono commitments. I am aware that I am doing all the wrong things. I am fairly motivated. I do need some help. And so the question is, how do you translate that into getting me some help? I used to have a Garmin. It lasted for 2 weeks, and then it stopped syncing with my mobile phone, and I don't know how to do it, so that's gone in the bin. Help can, however, be psychological. Your chair and I were talking about what stops me swimming. It's yucky changing rooms. I know they're not like that, but I feel plasters every time I look at them. I hate this idea. I'll never fit in. I am never going to be mammal. I am never going to wear Lycra. Please don't ask me to do that. And of course, it's the functional stuff. So also, if you look at me as a person and the people you're talking to as people, you might think my early history made me sporty. Of course, hockey was about you have to do it at school. I was quite good at it, that's fine. Rugby, good social life. And catamaraning is basically the most fun you're going to have with your clothes on. So, I mean, it wasn't about sport, it was about other benefits. And of course, all these things will have different levels of segmentation. So you can't assume, and I know you wouldn't, that hockey is the same as rugby or what have you. But it does mean, and this is a Revenue and Customs analysis, which you're perfectly welcome to, that you know those people who it's not worth talking to. So benefits and credits people obviously need more help than others, but you can see exactly how motivated small and medium-sized enterprises are to comply. And insight can be counterintuitive. People do a lot better with less information, funnily enough. So this relates to a benefits and credits case study. We were publishing 60 pages of guidance and help for filling in your forms, and we were incurring a huge millions and millions of pounds of cost. By actually looking at two things, how much assistance do you need, and who had we been talking to in the first place to do this, we found two things. One is that actually almost zero error happens if you give people almost zero information. How many of you are parents in the room? How many of you have helped your child with their homework? How many of your children got worse marks when you helped them with your homework? It always happens, and that's exactly the same principle. And actually, what we found out is that we had been talking in our research, our early research, to the intermediaries, the CABs, the Citizens Advice Bureaus. They wanted and needed the guidance. The punter didn't. So we provide them with the guidance. We don't provide any to the punter. We saved £60 million, and that's a lot of dosh. This comes from the court service. I would love to have been able to throw the book at people who use the court service for debt, to recover money from Mr. M. Mouse for the Milky Way, the universe, etc. Because if you're that lazy giving credit out, you really deserve to have it cost you in the end. You can't do that, unfortunately. My stupid tax has not been a runner with any of the political parties, so not going to work. But we did discover there were a group of people who could pay, well-off affluents, who actually were ending up in the courts for debt. And this turned out to be a problem with authority. So if you write these people letters or emails that look official, their default is to stick it behind the clock or not open the email. And so nothing happens and they find themselves in debt. So this resulted in a whole load of work with the financial authorities and how we can change that psychological attitude, and was in fact some insight I took into Revenue and Customs from the court service about the fact there is an attitudinal and a capability gap for these people. The capability gap is real. And the fourth one is nothing to do with me, but is the most important insight any large institution can have. I make no apologies for it being Tesco. Tesco actually discovered some years ago that big brand advertising didn't work. People don't like shopping at supermarkets. I would argue people with me probably don't like sport. But what they did discover, and they discovered that people didn't expect the experience ever to be nice. I really don't expect a cycling club ever to be for me, but I do expect them to have some control over their members. Tesco expected them to have non-squeaky trolleys and supermarket and checkout lanes that were open. So wherever you are, it's not the big stuff people expect you to get right. It's the little stuff. If you're in charge of the little stuff, they really do expect you to be quite efficient. So London Transport painted their tube stations first, didn't do anything about the trains. And it is interesting when you look at the number of hospitals that concentrate on cleaning the foyer, how many people therefore assume they're actually doing their best in other areas. So that is quite important as an attitudinal grouping. So where can you get the insight from? The Open Data Institute is a great example of sharing data. I think it's absolutely wonderful. We do work with them. So there is a lot of data around. The census has a huge amount of free data for now. It won't be around forever, I'm afraid. The BBC has some wonderful case studies on attitudes. And for example, they've done some good work on the difference between physical age and mental age and what it lets you engage with. That is for free. Obviously local government, and obviously your own data. Now, just to check your own data, one of the things I would suggest to you, and I think the example from the last speaker is relevant, is you need to check how it is formatted. Because how you collect the data will impact what decisions you take and what you're able to do in the future. I'm a great believer in something called the Lego theory, which is build small, and so you can put it together and you can take it apart if you don't need it. In terms of social media, a plea, don't forget this is very self-selecting. A lot of people just aren't there. Simple observation, you cannot have data that tells you that people have wrinkled their nose at something, or they rolled their eyes, or they gave the sigh. It just doesn't work. And I'm afraid I'm not in favour of the how did we do system, because that never shows you exactly what was going on. I just want to spend 2 seconds on customer journeys. This is a Revenue and Customs one, obviously. You can do your own. It doesn't take much. We've just done one for the training programme at the Market Research Society. It has enabled us to go from a methodologically based communications to one that says starting out, moving up, moving into leadership, getting specialist. Because that's how people think about their careers. They don't say, actually, I want to be a synectics professional. They don't work at it that way at all. This is also costed. So it actually showed for the finance directors around you that actually it costs almost as much to get things wrong as it does to get things right. So why not get things right? So some top tips to leave you with. You always give them in 5s. So here are 5. Can you please avoid the data dinosaur? Big data doesn't mean good data, and it certainly doesn't mean smart data. Don't forget the Diplodocus is a very huge, or was a very huge animal. It had a very, very small brain. So please try and make it smart and not just large. I think The Guardian once said 1,000 pieces of data analysed by a human are better than 1 million analysed by a machine. And we all know about bias. Collect less data, less GDPR problems. So just remember that. Avoid what I call the useless stuff. And that's a 2.5 bra trap, and that is data from the government, who wrote to a colleague of mine that they were very pleased to be able to tell him that as of now they could tell that ladies in the UK owned 2.5 brassieres on average. Yeah, okay, that's smart data. Recognise and focus, prioritise on the things you can change and focus on outcomes. I think the key is the tomato trap, you know. Just because people say tomato doesn't mean they're wrong. If that's the way they use the word, that's fine. So consumer perceptions in that case are their realities. And there is some government data, and just to those of you who want to get people to plan their activity, 1/3 of consumers never plan. So if you are going to work your marketing on the fact that people are going to plan around you, forget it. They won't do it. However, having said all that, I'm hugely encouraged by what I heard today. I'm sure you have great examples of where you are doing wonderful things. I just encourage you to have common sense. Do it with quality. You can phone us. We have a free code line. You can email me. But enjoy it, because consumers are great fun. So have fun with them, please. Thank you very much.